I didn't start a war with my neighbor. He started it with a pipe. Not a loud fight. Not some dramatic shouting match in the street. Just a quiet, deliberate decision to send his problem straight into my backyard and pretend it wasn't his anymore. And for a while, I almost let him get away with it. I've lived in this house in Millbrook, Oregon for a little over a decade now, long enough to know how the land breathes when it rains, how the soil softens, where the water settles, and where it disappears. It's one of those things you don't think about until you've been somewhere long enough to feel it, like the rhythm of a place. My backyard sits just slightly lower than the properties behind mine. Not by much, maybe a foot or so, just enough that during heavy storms, water would naturally drift my way. Nothing aggressive, nothing damaging, just a slow, shallow spread that the ground would soak up within a few hours. It had always been like that, even before I moved in, and the old neighbor, a quiet guy named Leonard, understood that balance without needing to talk about it. Leonard wasn't the kind of man who interfered with anything unless it truly mattered. He kept his yard simple, left the natural slope alone, never tried to outsmart the land, and because of that, everything just worked. Rain would come, water would move, the earth would take it back. No conflict, no tension, just a system that had figured itself out long before either of us showed up. Then Leonard sold the place. The new owners moved in fast, too fast, honestly, like they had something to prove the moment they arrived. His name was Bryce, mid-40s maybe, sharp haircut, always walking like he was late to something important even when he wasn't. And his wife, Dana, had this way of looking at everything like it needed to be upgraded immediately. Within the first 2 weeks, their backyard was already torn apart, machinery rolling in, contractors yelling over each other, piles of stone and tile stacked along the fence line like they were building something that needed to last forever. At first, I didn't think much of it. People renovate, that's normal, and if anything, I figured it might even help with the drainage situation if they did it right. I remember standing at my kitchen window one morning with a cup of coffee, watching them lay down these clean, modern pavers, raising sections of the yard, building out this polished patio area that sat noticeably higher than the original ground level. It looked nice, I'll give them that, sharp lines, neat edges, the kind of yard you'd see in a home magazine and think, yeah, that's put together. But there was something about the way they were reshaping the slope that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't explain it at the time, just a quiet feeling in the back of my mind, like watching someone adjust the foundation of something that had been stable for years without really understanding why it worked in the first place. I almost said something, almost. Then the first real storm of the season hit. It came in late, sometime after midnight. One of those steady, heavy rains that doesn't let up, not violent, just persistent, like it is all the time in the world. I slept through most of it, the sound of it hitting the roof blending into that familiar, white noise you get used to after years in the same place. But the next morning, something felt off before I even stepped outside. There's a certain stillness after a storm when everything has settled the way it's supposed to. This wasn't that. I opened the back door and just stood there for a second, barefoot on the threshold, looking out at my yard, and it took me a moment to process what I was seeing because it didn't make sense. Water was everywhere. Not the usual shallow spread that disappears by mid-morning. I'm talking puddles sitting thick across the lawn, pooling in places that had never held water before, reflecting the gray sky like patches of glass scattered across the grass. The ground looked overwhelmed, like it didn't know what to do with what it had been given. I walked out slowly, stepping carefully between the puddles, my eyes scanning the yard, trying to find the source, trying to understand what had changed overnight, and that's when I saw it. Right along the back edge of my property, just a few feet from the fence line, there was a pipe, new, clean, unmistakably intentional, sticking out from beneath their raised patio, angled just enough that there was no confusion about where it was pointing. Straight into my yard. I stood there for a while, just looking at it, letting the realization settle in, because this wasn't natural flow anymore. This wasn't the land doing what it had always done. This was directed. This was engineered. And suddenly, that uneasy feeling I'd had watching their construction made perfect sense. I told myself to wait. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the system would balance itself out once everything settled. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, mostly because I didn't feel like starting a problem with people I'd have to live next to every day. But 3 days later, the second storm came, and this time, I was ready. I stayed up late, sitting by the back window, lights off, just watching. And when the rain picked up, I saw it happen in real time. Water began collecting across their raised patio, moving exactly where their new slope directed it, gathering speed, funneling toward that pipe. And then, like clockwork, it poured out in a steady stream. Not a trickle, not a drip, a full, deliberate discharge aimed straight at my yard. It hit the ground with force, carving into the soil, spreading out in ways that had never happened before, overwhelming the natural absorption, turning my backyard into a catch basin for everything they didn't want to deal with. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. This was a decision. And the next morning, I walked over to their door and knocked. Bryce opened the door like I had interrupted something important, not annoyed exactly, just mildly inconvenienced, like I was a package he hadn't ordered. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, and before I could even finish saying good morning, his eyes flicked past me toward my yard like he already knew why I was there. Which, honestly, told me everything I needed to know. I kept it calm. I've learned over the years that the first tone you set in these situations matters more than anything else. Hey, I said, nodding back toward the fence. I think there's something going on with your drainage system. Water's been pouring straight into my yard since you finished the patio. He didn't even look surprised, just followed my gesture with his eyes, then shrugged, slow and casual, like we were talking about the weather. Yeah, the contractor installed a standard runoff line, he said. Water's got to go somewhere. I let that sit for a second, because there it was, right out in the open. No denial, no confusion, just a quiet admission wrapped in indifference. Right? I said, still keeping my voice even. But it's not supposed to come onto my property like that. It's flooding areas that never had issues before. Another shrug, slightly smaller this time, but sharper somehow. It's rainwater, he said. It'll dry. There's something about that kind of response that hits differently. Not loud, not aggressive, just dismissive in a way that tells you the conversation isn't going to go anywhere. I could have pushed harder, could have argued the details, raised my voice, tried to make him see reason, but standing there, looking at him, I realized something simple and uncomfortable. He didn't care. And you can't reason someone into caring when they've already decided not to. So I nodded once, gave him a tight little smile that probably didn't reach my eyes, and said, "All right. I just wanted to bring it to your attention." He nodded back like we had just resolved something, and closed the door. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, listening to the latch click into place, feeling that quiet shift inside me where frustration stops being reactive and starts becoming intentional. I didn't go back over there again. The next morning, I made 2 calls, one to a surveyor, one to a contractor. If Bryce wasn't interested in having a conversation, then I wasn't interested in having one either. I was interested in understanding exactly where the lines were, legally, physically, structurally. Because once you know the boundaries, you don't have to argue anymore. You just act within them. The surveyor, an older guy named Frank, showed up first, sun-faded hat, clipboard tucked under his arm, the kind of person who has spent decades measuring things most people never think about. We walked the back edge of my property together, him pacing it out, checking markers, occasionally kneeling down to brush dirt away from old boundary pins that had probably been there longer than either of us. He didn't say much while he worked, just took notes, made quiet observations, until he finally stood up near that pipe and pointed at the angle. "That's deliberate," he said, almost to himself. "Outlet's right on the line, but the direction? That's angled into your side." I exhaled slowly, not surprised, but hearing it confirmed out loud made it real in a different way. "So where does that put me?" He glanced at me, then back at the pipe. "You're within your rights to protect your property," he said. "As long as you're not sending anything back in a way that causes damage, you can control what happens on your side of the line." That phrasing stuck with me. Control what happens on your side. Later that afternoon, the contractor came by. Younger guy, sharp, efficient, the kind of person who sees problems in terms of solutions instead of emotions. I walked him through everything, showed him the pooling areas, the pipe, the slope, and he didn't need long to understand the situation. "They raised their grade," he said, crouching down to run his hand along the wet soil. "Which means all that runoff's got more speed now, and they gave it a direct exit point. You're basically their drainage field." I let out a dry laugh at that, because yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. "So what are my options?" I asked. He stood up, brushing his hands off, and looked along the fence line, eyes tracing the path the water had been taking. "You don't fight the water," he said. "You redirect it." Simple, almost too simple. But then he started explaining it, not just what to do, but why it would work. A raised barrier along the boundary to stop the direct flow, a controlled slope behind it to guide the water laterally instead of inward, and a drainage channel that would carry everything to a specific point, a point we could choose. And where would that point be? I asked, even though I had a feeling I already knew. He looked toward the far corner of my yard, then slightly beyond it, toward the edge of Bryce's patio where the new construction dipped just enough to be noticeable if you were paying attention. "Lowest return path," he said. I didn't respond right away, just followed his gaze, imagining it, the path, the movement, the way water always finds its level if you give it the right direction. This wasn't about retaliation, not really. It was about restoring balance, about taking something that had been forced onto my property and giving it somewhere else to go. Naturally. "All right," I said finally. "Let's do it." A week later, the crew showed up. It started early. The low rumble of equipment, the scrape of shovels, the steady rhythm of work that draws attention whether you want it to or not. I was out there with them, going over the plan one last time, when I noticed movement at the back door of Bryce's house. Right on cue. He stepped out onto his patio, coffee in hand, squinting slightly in the morning light, trying to piece together what he was looking at, and then Dana appeared beside him, arms folded, both of them standing there in that quiet, watchful way people do when they realize something is happening that involves them, even if no one has said it out loud yet. They didn't come over right away, just watched. The crew started along the boundary line, marking out the trench first, then bringing in compacted soil, stacking stone blocks with a precision that made it clear this wasn't just decorative. This was structure. Intentional, solid, built to hold. I could feel their eyes on us the entire time. It wasn't until the barrier started taking shape, rising higher than a simple edging, that Bryce finally walked over, slow steps, measured, like he was trying to decide what tone to take before he even opened his mouth. "What's going on here?" he asked, stopping a few feet away, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it a question instead of an accusation. I didn't turn immediately, just finished what I was saying to the contractor, then glanced over at him. "Fixing my yard," I said. He looked past me at the growing ridge, then at the trench forming behind it, his expression tightening just slightly. "That seems excessive." I shrugged, mirroring his own gesture from a few days earlier, letting that moment hang between us. "Water's gotta go somewhere," I said. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have a quick response. Dana shifted beside him, her eyes moving from the barrier to the pipe, then back to me, like she was starting to connect the dots faster than he was. There was a flicker of something there, not quite concern, not quite realization, but close. They stayed for a few more minutes, watching as the structure took form, as the ground behind it was shaped carefully, angled with purpose, and then they went back inside without another word. We kept working. Layer by layer, piece by piece, the system came together, the ridge forming a clean, solid line along the boundary, the soil behind it graded just right, and finally, the drainage channel itself, filled with clean stone, running the full length of the barrier like a quiet path waiting to do its job. And at the end of that path, the lowest corner, the return point. By the time the crew packed up and left, the yard looked different, not just fixed, but deliberate, like it had learned something. All that was left now was the rain. The rain came back 3 days later. Not dramatic, not some cinematic thunderstorm with lightning cracking across the sky, just a steady, soaking kind of rain that settles in and stays a while, the kind that really tests whatever changes you've made to the ground. I remember standing by the back door again, same spot as before, hand resting against the frame, just watching it build, the slow gathering of water, the quiet anticipation of what was about to happen. And across the fence, I could see Bryce step out onto his patio, same as last time, coffee in hand, except this time there was no casualness in the way he stood there. He was watching too. We both were. It started exactly how it had before, water collecting across his raised patio, gliding over those clean tiles, following the slope he paid good money to create, moving with purpose toward that pipe. For a brief moment, everything looked identical to the last storm. Same flow, same direction, same assumption that it would all end up in my yard like it had before. Then it hit the barrier. You could actually see the moment it changed, the stream pouring out of the pipe, hitting that ridge, breaking its forward momentum like a wave against rock, then gathering itself again. But this time, it didn't spread. It didn't sink into my lawn. It turned. Clean. Controlled. Predictable. The water slid sideways along the channel, picking up speed as more joined it, guided by the slope we'd carved into the ground, moving exactly where it was supposed to go. No chaos, no flooding, just direction. I stepped out into the rain a little, not enough to get soaked, just enough to feel it, to be part of that moment instead of watching it through glass. And I could feel it. Not anger, not even satisfaction in the way you'd expect, more like a quiet sense of things clicking back into place. The channel carried everything down the line, straight to that far corner, the lowest return point, right where his patio dipped. At first, it didn't look like much, just a small collection of water at the edge, something you might ignore if you weren't paying attention. But the rain didn't stop, and neither did the flow. More water came, steady, consistent, building on itself, filling the space his design had unintentionally left vulnerable. I glanced up and caught Bryce staring at it. Really staring now, not just observing, but calculating, trying to understand why the system he trusted was suddenly behaving differently. By the time the rain eased off later that night, the outcome was clear. My yard was fine. Damp, sure, but no standing water, no flooding, nothing out of place. It looked the way it had for the past 10 years after any heavy storm, like the land had done its job and moved on. His patio, on the other hand, by morning, a thin layer of water still lingered across the lowest section, not deep enough to cause damage, not dramatic enough to call an emergency, but constant. Stubborn. The kind of problem that doesn't go away on its own because it was never designed to. I didn't go over. I didn't need to. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and there he was. Bryce, same guy, same posture, but something in his expression had shifted, like the edges had softened just enough to let something real through. No coffee this time. Just a pause before he spoke. "Hey," he said, glancing briefly past me toward the backyard like he wanted to confirm what he already knew. "Got a minute?" I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "Sure." There was a beat of silence, not uncomfortable, just different. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaled lightly, then nodded toward the fence. "I've been noticing some water collecting near the patio," he said. "Didn't happen before." I held his gaze for a second, then gave a small nod. "Yeah, I've noticed that too." Another pause, longer this time. He shifted his weight, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. I was wondering if maybe something could be adjusted. "On your end, I mean." And there it was. Not the same tone, not the same shrug, not the same casual dismissal. This was careful, measured, almost respectful in a way that hadn't been there before. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms, not defensively, just grounded. "It already was adjusted," I said. His eyes flicked past me again, toward the drainage channel, then back toward the line where his pipe sat just out of view. You could practically see the connection happening in real time. The realization that nothing I had done crossed a line, that everything was contained within my property, that the only thing that had really changed was where the water was allowed to go. He let out a slow breath, not frustrated, not angry, just aware. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Simple question, but it carried a lot more weight than the first conversation we had. I didn't hesitate. "Redirect the pipe," I said, "away from my property, the way it should have been done in the first place." No edge in my voice, no threat, just a clear line drawn in the sand. He nodded slowly, like he expected that answer, like he had probably been turning it over in his head before he even walked across the yard. "All right," he said. "Yeah, that makes sense." And just like that, the entire situation shifted. No argument, no escalation, just understanding. A week later, contractors were back at his place, quieter this time, more precise, adjusting the drainage system, rerouting that pipe so it no longer pointed at my yard, but instead fed into a proper runoff path along his own property. I watched from a distance, not out of suspicion, just closure. After the next rain, everything worked the way it should have from the beginning. Water moved, the ground absorbed what it could, and the rest followed a path that didn't turn neighbors into problems. We never talked about it again. Not directly, anyway. There were small things, a nod when we passed each other, a brief morning here and there, nothing warm, but not hostile either. Just neutral. And honestly, that was enough. Because here's the thing. I didn't set out to get revenge. I just refused to carry someone else's problem when they decided it was easier to drop it on me. And sometimes, you don't need to fight people to make a point. You just need to let the consequences of their own decisions find their way back. Now I'm curious what you think. Was that fair? Or did I take it too far by sending the water back his way? Even if technically I never crossed the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because situations like this, they're never as simple as they look from the outside. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Bryce, I definitely want to hear how you handled it.